PragerU is still wrong about colorblindness. And yes, I meant to say still. Dennis Prager previously has made multiple videos about colorblindness, except for this time, he got a black person to say it for him. Conservatives always talking about identity politics when they are the main people that use it. They always find the minority to talk badly about the minority that they're talking about. Actually, I kind of want to get in on this. I want my slice of the pie. America's pretty neat, and Americans like you are cool and great. Non-binary people, on the other hand, are stupid, bad, gross, and stinky. Yes, they are very stinky. 87.3% of non-binary people measure at least a 7 on the stinky scale. So how can America survive with all these stinky, smelly non-binary people? I'm Sharkyevno, a non-binary person and the author of a book you've never heard of, for Prager University. Alright, I'm not going to record this whole video with a PragerU background, so let's make it a little gayer. Bisexual lighting. Much better. My other colored light I can't find the plug-in for, so I can't have the blue light. Tragedy. Over the last few years, I've thought that PragerU has become more and more relevant. Mostly because I haven't seen their ads as much, people haven't really been talking that much about them, but that was until I heard one of my friend's moms talk about them, and talk about how she liked them. That made me look them up again, and when I did that, I saw that their most recent video was with a Supreme Court Justice and Republican mega donor sugar baby, Clarence Thomas. Now, we all know the Supreme Court is partisan and has been for a long time. But they're not even trying to hide it anymore. This led to me looking at some of their most recent videos from their most popular series, the 5-minute short series, and 2 of them caught my attention, partially because my friend's mom brought up talking points from both of them. So today I'm going to be looking at and debunking one of them, America Must Be Colorblind, and I'll save the other one for my next video. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell for that one. And for this one, if you like the video, make sure to like it and leave any comments or thoughts that you had on the video in the comment section below. I really like hearing what you guys have to say about my videos, and also a like and comment really helps in the algorithm, which is huge for small channels like me. But no more intro, I'm not here to waste your time. Let's get right into it.
America must be a colorblind society, or it won't be America. There will still be a country that borders Canada and Mexico and sits between 2 oceans, but it won't be the nation envisioned by Thomas Jefferson in the Declaration of Independence, or Frederick Douglass in his What to the Slave is the 4th of July oration, or Abraham Lincoln in his Gettysburg Address, or Reverend Martin Luther King Jr. in his I Have a Dream speech.
PragerU will always gesture at what previous historical figures would have wanted for America to justify their bad beliefs, when the people they reference would have hated them. Frederick Douglass's What to the Slave is the 4th of July is about how it's hypocritical for Americans to celebrate how great our country is and how free we are, when a part of our population is oppressed. This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn, to drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated Temple of Liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems, were inhumane mockery and sacrilegious irony. Conservatives will always talk about how people like Martin Luther King would have been against reparations or against the colorblind ideology. But then will ignore that he directly stated that he is in favor of reparations, with him saying in his book, Why We Can't Wait, no amount of gold could provide an adequate compensation for the exploitation and humiliation of the Negro down through the centuries. Not all the wealth in this affluent society could pay the bill, yet a price can be placed on unpaid wages. The payment should be in the form of a massive program of special, compensatory measures which could be regarded as a settlement in accordance with the accepted practice of common law. Orr's letter from a Birmingham jail, where he directly criticizes the colorblindness of white moderates and how they get in the way of progressive movements. There is a reason why the "I had a dream" speech is so emphasized in our society. It is because it is the most palatable to our establishment and poses the least threat to power structures. But even for "I had a dream," most of the speech is ignored, except for the parts that are convenient to conservatives.
But 100 years later, the Negro still is not free. 100 years later, the life of the Negro is still sadly crippled by the manacles of segregation and the chains of discrimination. 100 years later, the Negro lives on a lonely island of poverty in the midst of a vast ocean of material prosperity. 100 years later.
In the speech, Martin Luther talks about how even after the abolition of slavery, black people still suffered the consequences of oppression. How they don't see the benefit of America's wealth like white people do. With wealth inequality still existing today, with black households having only 12.7% of the median wealth a white household has. And Thomas Jefferson definitely didn't believe in colorblindness, with his true beliefs probably being a little bit more aligned with Dennis Prager's actual beliefs. The blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstance, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of both body and mind. The only person cited that could have been considered a believer of colorblindness would have been Abraham Lincoln, with all the other speeches being directly against it.
Until recently, every school child knew what it meant to be colorblind. But that's no longer true. So I'll explain it. To be colorblind is to be guided by the belief that immutable traits, such as race, tell you nothing important about a person. The color of your skin is as meaningless as the color of your eyes. What matters are your actions.
Okay. After this one, I'm gonna make my comments on the video more brief, but I have to get some foundations down first. This isn't actually what people who say they are colorblind believe. Being interpersonally colorblind is a fine goal to have. But people who espouse the ideology of colorblindness want to expand that to systematic issues, and say that we should not think about race for systemic issues. Black people in America have been experiencing overt legalized racism in more ways than just slavery. After the Emancipation Proclamation of 1863, slaves were not compensated with 40 acres and a mule as promised. Actually, what happened was that the slave owners were compensated instead, and many of the slaves just turned into indentured servants. The slaves were just set free with nothing into a country full of racism, or just became indentured servants, which is essentially just contract slavery. Or Jim Crow. Or the Jim Crow era, which lasted until the late 1950s, when both of the people running for president were teenagers. Where they were legally second-class citizens and often the victim of lynching. Or the GI Bill of 1944, which gave veterans things like free education, free medical care, free access to unemployment, or most importantly, backed veterans home loans, which gave them easy access to housing. And owning a home is one of the easiest ways to build generational wealth. Most black veterans were excluded from these benefits. And even if they did have the resources to buy a home, banks prevented black people from getting home loans in most areas. This is known as redlining, and it wasn't outlawed until 1968, only 4 years before Joe Biden became a senator. And redlining continued long after that, mostly operating in legal gray areas. And it even partially exists today, with black-owned homes being worth less than identical white-owned homes.
And what was the number value? You open up that piece of paper and what is it?
Oh, $998,000.
Less than $1 million.
Less than $1 million.
Which means almost $400,000 less than the appraisal you got a year earlier.
Yes.
And so they applied for a new appraisal, but this time
I'm going to guarantee that I'm going to get the appraisal that my house is supposed to get.
And in the United States, what is your best guarantee of getting the best rate possible?
Being white.
Being white.
So they worked to erase themselves from their own home.
All of our art, took that away, pictures of our family, anything that, would resemble that this home belongs to a black family. Just grabbed it all, put it all in the shed, put it all away.
And they asked a white friend to stand in when the new appraiser arrived.
So this time you open the paper and it says what?
1.482.
Yes. $500,000 difference.
Even after that, in the 1970s, the United States started the drug war, which specifically targeted drugs that black people used more than white people, to put black people in prison for decades for non-violent drug offenses, with the people behind it directly admitting that this was done to target black people. You want to know what this was really about? The Nixon campaign in 1968 and the Nixon White House after that had two enemies: the anti-war left and black people. You understand what I'm saying? We knew we couldn't make it illegal to be either against the war or black. But by getting the public to associate hippies with marijuana and blacks with heroin, and then criminalize both heavily, we could disrupt those communities. We could arrest their leaders, raid their homes, break up their meetings, and vilify them night after night on the evening news. Did we know we were lying about the drugs? Of course we did. Putting mainly black men in prison to do free labor, using the 13th Amendment's exception for criminal punishment as a way to make a modern-day slave system. And the war on drug even continues to today. And even today, black people get substantially longer sentences for the same crime. Or how marijuana use is roughly equal among blacks and whites. Yet black people are 3.7 times as likely to be arrested for it. And that only scratches the surface of it. There's also things like chemical plants being more likely to be built in black neighborhoods, or black neighborhoods more likely to have lead in the water. If you look at all that history and even modern day injustices, and say that you shouldn't be aware of race and how it affects people when looking at systematic issues, you are racist. Like I said, the median black household has 12.7% of the wealth as white households. There has to be a reason for that. And you either believe it's socioeconomic factors and circumstance, or you believe it's something inherent to being black, which is racist. And that's how being systematically colorblind is racist. And even for interpersonal colorblindness, let me put an asterisk on that being good. I still believe it's a good goal to strive for, but I think you need to be consciously aware of race and how it affects you to achieve that goal. I truly believe that everyone has some racial bias. Not only white people, everyone. But I don't believe that having some racial bias makes you racist, because if I believed that, I would believe that everyone was racist. I could just have a catchy headline and say, I believe everyone's racist. Everyone. Oh, we're all racist. Some less than others. But you have to be aware of your racial bias to fix it. Let me give a good example. So I was in a sociology class, and we had to look at a specific situation or scenario, and then decide as a class if people in that scenario were racist. In this scenario, a white woman saw a black person in gym clothes in the office. She thought it was an intruder and called security. This black person in gym clothes ended up being another professor. Given the information on how she probably acted with racial bias. Also, by the way, we were also asked if the black professor was racist for assuming that the white professor only called security because he was black. So the questions went both ways. But anyways, during the discussion, I made the point that I believe that she acted with racial bias, but I don't think that she was racist. I think that how she acts afterwards and whether or not she tries to correct her racial bias will decide whether she's racist or not. And actually, everyone in my sociology class agreed with me that everyone has racial bias, except for one person, who said that he has zero racial bias at all and treats everyone exactly the same. And after that, we were told actually by our professor that in this scenario, the white professor actually agreed with the fact that she did her actions because of racial bias, apologized to the black professor, and then they started working together on analyzing how race impacts how people interact or something like that. This was years ago, so I don't remember the specifics, but happy ending. Well, just after that, the person who said he had zero racial bias raised his hand to tell us how he disagreed with the ending. He was called on and told the class, wait for it, that the woman was justified in treating the black person differently than she would have a white person because black people commit 50% of the crimes while being 15% of the population, and that even a non-racist person would be more cautious around black people simply given the statistics. This man just 1350'd a sociology professor. And if you don't know what 1350 means, it's a crime statistic that says that black people commit 50% of the crime while being 13% of the population. It's a well-known white supremacist dog whistle that uses FBI statistics to say that black people are inherently more likely to commit crime and are inherently more violent, while ignoring all socioeconomic factors that actually cause the disparity in crime statistics. Like the fact that black people get prosecuted for crimes more, or the fact that black people are more likely to be convicted by a jury, or how black neighborhoods simply have more police presence than white neighborhoods, and because of that, black people are more likely to be caught committing minor crimes. But the most important part is the fact that black people are more poor than white people, and poor people are more likely to commit crimes. All those factors pretty much completely account for all of the discrepancy. This video isn't meant to be just talking about 1350, but it's incredible that the one guy who couldn't admit that he had some racial bias just 2 minutes later started parroting white supremacist talking points to an entire sociology class. By the way, that guy was in the training process of becoming a cop. And this was years ago, so he is most likely currently a police officer. That's what I mean when I say that people who are consciously colorblind are often more subconsciously racist. It's because people who are unwilling to understand that race plays a role in things are more likely to not analyze their own biases. I also think it's really important to not be ashamed of the fact that you have some racial biases. I think that shame is a really unproductive emotion. I'm not ashamed that I have racial biases, I just try to be aware of them and fix them. And unlike so many YouTube shorts comments say, I'm not ashamed to be white. I just try to be aware of how that affects me and try to limit my racial biases. Like, there are some speeding tickets I do not think I would have gotten out of if I had more melanin in my skin. Which is great for me. It's wonderful for me. But I should be aware of that. Alright, back to the video.
No one said it better than Reverend King. I have a dream that my 4 little children will one day live in a nation where they will not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of their character.
Further showing the fact that they will just point out one part of his speech while ignoring all of his previous works, and even ignoring literally earlier parts of the speech they're quoting.
King said those words in 1963. By the time Barack Obama became president in 2009, King's dream had been effectively realized.
Guys, Obama was president. Racism doesn't exist anymore. Obama was president. He was president, guys. They just use such drawn-out talking points. Like, what is it, like 2014? I want some creativity in my racism. Give it a little spice, a little pizzazz, okay? This is getting boring. Give me some innovative racism.
Yes, there were still individual racists, but racism was dead, universally discredited. No one who espoused overtly racist views was taken seriously in America. And then they were. Why and how this reversal took place is complex, of course. But if we were to ascribe it to one recent event,
I can literally recognize George Floyd from the silhouette because everyone always uses the same picture of him.
It would be the death of George Floyd, Floyd, a black man, died while in police custody in May 2020. On the heels of Floyd's death, issues of race preoccupied the nation. A new vision of America was emerging. Colorblind was out, anti-racism was in.
Hell yeah. But anyways, criticisms of the colorblind ideology have existed long before George Floyd. Case in point, literally the guy you keep quoting.
And what is anti-racism? Here's how Ibram X. Kendi, a professor at Boston University and the leading figure of the anti-racist movement, described it. The only remedy to racist discrimination is anti-racist discrimination. The only remedy to past discrimination is present discrimination. The only remedy to present discrimination is future discrimination.
This quote is optically not great and could have been worded in a less inflammatory way. But the idea behind it is correct. You might put it in a way like, the only remedy to past discrimination is current restitution. Let me explain. So I once saw this great analogy in a Reddit comment section. I know, soy jack Redditor memes, okay? But it was a really good analogy. I don't know if that Redditor stole it from somewhere else, and if it was stolen from somewhere else, like, I don't know, put it in the comments where it originally came from. But it was a really good analogy. But I'm going to add to it substantially and make some pretty major changes to make it a bit better, I think. I wrote it down, okay? I'm going to read it. I'm going to read it from my phone. So you have a race. Let's just say it's a race with all European countries. Everyone lines up, the starting gun blows, and everyone starts running. 20 seconds into the race, the runner from Denmark pulls out a pistol from his waistband and shoots the runner from Sweden in the knee and runs past him. The Swedish runner, screaming in pain on the floor, yells to the referee, "Aren't you gonna do something? He just shot me in the knee." The ref looks at the Swedish runner and says, "Yeah, that's really unfair. From now on, you can no longer shoot other runners in the knee." The ref then starts walking away. The Swedish runner sitting there, with his knee that's nothing but bone shards, says, "I'm glad that no one's gonna get shot in the knee anymore. That's great. But my knee still doesn't work. So, you gonna do something about that? I'm literally bleeding out here. Can I get some help or something, please?" The ref turns around and is like, "What, do you need handouts or something? Can't Swedish people run without handouts? It would be unfair to the other runners if we, helped you or something." The Danish runner finishes the race in first, and he hears some Danish fans saying stuff like, "Damn, the Swedish runner can't even finish the race? He's just sitting on the track? Swedish people really do suck at running." Now, I don't think that I have to explain the analogy for you. But even if we lived in a society with zero racism, which we don't, but if that hypothetical society had hundreds of years of racism, oppression, and discrimination that led one racial group to be a lot poorer than everyone else, they are going to continue being poor because wealthy people have a significant advantage over poor people. If you were born rich, you're most likely to die rich. If you are born poor, you're most likely to die poor. This isn't the case for everyone, so put away your example of one poor black person being successful. It is the trend though. So even in a fully non-racist society, you can still have systemic racism.
In other words, only by discriminating against whites can equality be achieved. How long will it take and who determines when the goal is reached? No one has ever bothered to say.
It's not discrimination against whites. It's discrimination in favor of people who have been the victims of discrimination. It's like the race analogy that I gave. Like if people were to get upset that the organizers of the tournament gave crutches to the guy that got shot in the knee. And there are other ways to give reparations than direct payments to black people. And I even have some criticisms of direct payment reparations. This is because in our system, businesses are set up in a way that extracts wealth from poor non-white neighborhoods into wealthy white people's hands. For example, you have things like Walmart. they'll go into a neighborhood of mostly Black or Hispanic people, undercut all the other local stores, and force everyone to shop at Walmart. And when everyone's shopping at Walmart, all the proceeds of that business go to the Walton family on the other side of the country. There are a bunch of studies which show how Black money circulates a lot less time in their community than white people, and very quickly gets siphoned off to wealthy shareholders. It's not because I don't think that Black people know how to spend their money or they're worse at spending their money than white people. It's because our systems are set up in a way that siphons wealth from them. And I do believe that direct payments would cause some benefit, but I don't believe that that benefit would be worth all the racial division that it would cause. And that's ignoring all the complicated issues like how do you decide who gets paid? How much melanin needs to be in your skin? How close of ancestry do you have to slavery? All of those issues and division for a solution that I don't think would end up doing that much. Now, I don't have like a perfect solution, but you could do things like specifically invest in communities that were redlined. Or if you want something even more race neutral, you could do things that actually give poor people a chance at being successful and make a more even playing field. By doing things like making college free, or giving access to healthcare, or giving free school lunches to children at school. If you want, you can watch the video I did on that after this one, a link in description. All these things would make a more level playing field, and give benefits to literally everyone, and would even benefit the United States government by giving them a more educated population. And the more and more we give everyone, including poor people, a level playing field, the less and less reparations become necessary. But by some coinky-dink force of nature, the same people who are against reparations are also against all the things that would actually make us a meritocratic society. Like free college, access to welfare, or other things that would make a level playing field for disadvantaged people. What a coincidence that the people that constantly talk about meritocracy are the same people that are against the measures that would make us more of a meritocracy. And as to the question, how long will it take? I don't know. I'm not omniscient. But given the fact that systemic racism continues to be perpetuated, and that the average Black person has significantly less wealth than the average white person, and significantly less access to other resources, I would say that we have quite a ways to go.
White Americans' anti-racist thinking goes are either flat-out bigots or undeserving beneficiaries of past and present racism.
No, that's not actually true. I don't believe that racism benefits the average white person. I believe that it benefits a small portion of the upper crust elite of white people. But for the average person, it isn't a zero-sum game. For example, the GI Bill, which gave veterans easier access to housing. The average white veteran would not have been negatively affected by Black people also receiving the same benefits. Or the war on drugs, which was waged as a way to incarcerate Black people. These policies were disastrous for Black people, but they also harmed the average white person, to a lot lesser extent. These policies increased crime and cost the government over $1 trillion, and that's ignoring all the economic harm they also caused. I believe that the rhetoric that white supremacy and racism only harms Black people to be unhelpful and create a lot of us versus them. It's good for society as a whole to get rid of systemic racism. And as him saying that anti-racists believe that racism is every single white person's fault and all white people are bigots, that's simply not true. Only a very tiny, minuscule minority of people say that, and the rest of us criticize them for it.
The system is rotten to the core, thus the commonly used term systemic racism. For Kendi, race explains everything. This is critical race theory, or CRT. Diversity, equity, and inclusion, DEI, is another expression of the same idea. If you're not seen as white, your race explains every personal failure. And if you are seen as white, your whiteness explains every personal success.
No one says that. Correction, like 3 people on Twitter say that, and no one listens.
Your character doesn't matter. This is the exact opposite of colorblindness. You can't follow Kindy's anti-racist philosophy and, at the same time, endorse King's I Have a Dream message.
Yes, you can. Because anti-racist philosophy was literally in the I Had a Dream speech. They literally would have hated MLK, despised him, which makes it all the more frustrating when they act like he would have agreed with them. Really quick before I continue the video, I now have a Patreon that you can join and donate to. It is in the link in the description, and it has a bunch of cool benefits that you can get by giving me money. The thing is that these videos actually do cost a bit because of editing software, because of subscriptions so that I can get sources. All that stuff costs money, and also these videos take a lot of time. And I do freelance work, so every time I'm not working and doing something else instead, I'm technically losing money. So I want to make this at least somewhat sustainable, and also I just had $7,000 of camera equipment stolen, so that's not very fun. But anyways, if you are able to, only if you are able to and want to donate to my Patreon, you can go do that. Again, link in the description. Also, I have the YouTube membership thing on where you can click join and get the same benefits. I get a smaller cut of that, so I prefer if you use Patreon, but if you want to use YouTube instead, you can also do that. Back to the video.
One judges people by their race, the other by their actions. One loathes America, the other has faith in America. One has no finish line, the other does. In a short period of time, the new racists have created an entire industry devoted to promoting race consciousness. It has spread like a cancer into virtually every university and corporation in America. The University of Michigan has a DEI staff of 241 and an annual budget of $30 million, all supposedly to root out racism at one of America's most liberal colleges.
Universities are huge and have a massive budget. Michigan University's yearly operating budget is $13.4 billion. Their DEI division accounts for 0.2% of that. 0.2% of their operating budget. Not 2%, 0.2%. And they have the largest DEI branch out of any university, which is why PragerU chose to use them as their statistic, which means the highest spending out of any university is 0.2%. I've been working on a video now for about half a year, maybe even more, about how people lie to you with statistics, and this is a perfect example of how they do it.
Name a major corporation, and it probably has a fully staffed DEI department. It's even infiltrated some elementary schools, where students are encouraged to sort themselves by race.
Where? Where is this happening? Like, are you talking about the blue eyes, brown eyes social experiment that was done by like one teacher? They're acting like all over the country's school are separating students by race. Source, I made it the f*** up. Note from editor, me, I'm the editor. So I looked further into the case that they're vaguely talking about in their video and their source. First of all, their source is from the Conservative American, so unbiased, non-political organization. But anyways, basically is that this situation takes place at a super elite New York private school, not a public school. No, these are parents that are paying large amounts of money and choosing to put their kid in this school. Basically what happened was that you have 4th and 5th graders that were separated based on race in small groups, and they would discuss about their similarities and differences and talk about how like separating people might make stuff worse or uncomfortable or hurt people. I kinda understand what they were trying to do, But I think that type of like social experiment is maybe a little bit too nuanced for 4th and 5th graders. They really haven't developed that like reasoning and critical thinking yet. So I don't think that stuff like this should be done. I think that you can talk about race and how it affects people in a very dumbed down, simplified way to elementary schoolers. Like, you can talk about how they're not that different. You can talk about how you gotta be inclusive and stuff like that. But yeah, this is not exactly great. It's poorly thought out. But anyways, PragerU is using a elite private schools poorly thought out social experiment from like 10 years ago. It's 2015. To show how our schools are being overrun by anti-white racism and our public education is an anti-white mess. 2015. One private school. You know what? Actually, I'll say it. Conservatives are actually the ones doing this. Not directly, mind you, but they're doing it in ways like making segregated schools by making rich suburbs that black people can't access, so they have almost all white schools. They're doing things like private education that mostly white people go to, and then the mostly black or Hispanic schools have less funding because public schools are funded based on property taxes, all policies that these people push for, or they're continuously pushing to defund public schools, something that poor low-income people rely on, and relying more on private education where they have their mostly segregated white rich schools. And they'll always push against affordable housing in these white areas because they know that it will attract people of color who are often less wealthy than the white people, and because of that, their schools and neighborhoods will become less segregated.
It means violent crime ripping through the suburbs. You know, they talk about women. I think suburban women like me a lot. You know, it's fake stuff. Why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they? You know, I put something in when I was president. There will be no low-income housing developments built in areas that are right next to your house. You have a house in the suburbs, you're so proud, and then they want to build a low-income job with a 30-story building next to your house, and your house is worthless. And I stopped it. And then they say, well, I don't think suburban women like them. I think they like me. I'm going to keep criminals out of your neighborhood. That's really all that matters. I think they like me anyway.
They're the real ones segregating elementary schoolers. These conservative organizations will push for racist policies, but they know that they can't actually write policies that will directly segregate black people. They know that they have to do it in an indirect way, through targeting black people through statistical trends.
Is how abstract you handle the race thing. In other words, you start out, and now y'all aren't quoting me on this. You start out in 1954 by saying no. By 1968, you can't say no. That hurts your backfire, so you say stuff like forced busing, states' rights, and all that stuff. And you're getting so abstract now, you're talking about cutting taxes, and all of these things you're talking about are totally economic things, and the byproduct of them is blacks get hurt worse than whites. And subconsciously, maybe that is part of it. I'm not saying that, but I'm saying that if it is getting that abstract and that coded, that we're doing away with the racial problem one way or the other. You follow me? Because obviously sitting around saying we want to cut taxes, we want to cut this, and we want is much more abstract than even the busing thing, and a hell of a lot more abstract than, you know. So any way you look at it, race is coming on the back burner.
Powerful conservatives are quite aware of socioeconomics when they use them to craft racist policies. They love sociology when racism is their goal.
How do we restore the colorblind ideal? First, we must understand that America's founding principle that all men are created equal, as Jefferson put it, is colorblind.
The blacks, whether originally a distinct race or made distinct by time and circumstance, are inferior to the whites in the endowments of both body and mind.
That's why Frederick Douglass implored us to stand by those principles in the Declaration and the Constitution. Be true to them on all occasions.
This 4th of July is yours, not mine. You may rejoice, I must mourn. To drag a man in fetters into the grand illuminated Temple of Liberty and call upon him to join you in joyous anthems were inhumane mockery and sacrilegious irony.
To be colorblind isn't to be ignorant of the role race played in America's past.
It's to be ignorant about how it affects people in the present.
It's to learn from that past. And the lesson is, people shouldn't be judged by their skin color. To think otherwise doesn't fight racism, it promotes it. That's what Lincoln was getting at when, during a bloody civil war over the issue of slavery, he said at Gettysburg that America would experience a new birth of freedom. To regard skin color as meaningless is not only the American ideal, it is the human ideal.
Skin color is meaningless. Except for maybe how much sunscreen you need. Do you know that my eyes can get sunburned because they're so light-colored? My eyes get sunburned. But yes, skin color is meaningless. But our society has put meaning behind it for hundreds of years. And it would be a lie to act like the meaning we put behind it for hundreds of years doesn't affect people today.
Why would we discard this belief for something so narrow, bigoted, and phony as anti-racism and its equivalents, CRT and DEI? To be American is to be colorblind. Full stop. I'm Andre Archie, professor of philosophy at Colorado State University and author of The Virtue of Colorblindness for Prager University.
Of course it's a philosophy professor. Of course it is. These are the videos that conservatives want to put in schools. And in 4 states, Prager University videos are already being taught in schools. And I hinted this in the thumbnail, but I do find it quite interesting how PragerU always uses a certain minority to talk badly about that minority. And Dennis Prager will use these minorities to basically shit talk their own minority group to his primarily white audience. Conservatives will always talk about identity politics when they're the ones constantly using them as shields. Anytime you criticize them, they'll turn around and be like, "You're the real racists." And they'll use terms like democratic plantation, which basically criticizes black people for voting Democrat, and use other slave-related terminology like being shackled to Democrats, acting like black people voting Democrat means they're submissive or sheep, when the real reason is that Republicans are just racist. Like, a lot of black people are socially conservative, but they're not gonna vote for a party that overtly hates them. And even people like Clarence Thomas have used the democratic plantation rhetoric. It goes all the way up to the Supreme Court. People like Clarence Thomas will use this rhetoric while actively working to make our country a Christian nationalist dictatorship. But anyways, this video isn't about Clarence Thomas. It's about Prager University. Not a real university, by the way. Hey, Dennis Prager, how about you stop getting minorities to say your racist talking points and just say it yourself? I, a white person, will gladly go up to any black person you hire and tell them to their face that they are racist. Don't care. You can say that I'm the real racist. I do not care at all. I will tell the black people you hire that they are wrong about race when I literally glow in the dark. So it's the summer, so it's super hot, and I can't use air conditioning while recording. And I have a bunch of really hot lights beaming down on me, and because of that, my camera literally overheated. I'm sweating so bad. But anyways, Dennis Prager and Prager University are bad and stupid and dumb and stinky and smelly. Did you know that 87.3% of all studies conclude that Dennis Prager is stinky and smelly? It's real. Trust my sources. Anyways, the next video that I'm going to be making is debunking PragerU's climate change video. It's going to be right here. It might not be released yet because it's the next video that I'm making. If it's not, click this video instead. That's lower down. It's a very fun, good video. I don't know what video it is because YouTube will just decide what video to recommend to you right there. But trust me, it's a good video.